US officials are trying to identify who leaked a string of highly classified military documents, including sensitive information on the war in Ukraine. More than 50 reports labelled secret or top secret have been posted on social media. One of them outlines how Ukraine's air defence systems could be just weeks away from depletion. They also reveal American eavesdropping on allied nations like South Korea, Turkey and Israel. Well, let's go to New York now and speak to our correspondent, John Terrett. Good to see you, John. I mean, this is quite explosive. I mean, how potentially dangerous is this leak?
Well, I tell you, Julia, they're scrambling over at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. today, and the reason for that is that this dump of information on social media is almost in real time. I mean, this stuff is only a couple of weeks old. It's almost just happened or is still happening. And the other thing that's worrying, I think, is that it does come or appear to come from the highest level. As a result of that, the Department of Justice in D.C. has now launched an investigation. The thinking is that the leak may have been internal rather than outside the country. It's the biggest one since Edward Snowden leaked to the Russians back in 2013, and it came in two tranches. There was one back in March, and then there was a much bigger one last week, about 100 documents or so, which appeared online. Among the allegations in them, the US is spying on Russia, South Korea, Turkey, Israel, Ukraine. There appears to be, as you suggested in the intro there, weakness in the weaponry being used by the Ukrainians, particularly regarding their air defences, which may run out of supplies as early as May. There appears to be a date for a spring offensive by the Ukrainians against the Russians, which of course would help the Russians plan a counterattack against them. And here in New York, the New York Post tabloid newspaper reporting this morning that a Russian jet almost brought down a UK aircraft last year. And that, of course, is very, very serious because it would bring NATO into direct conflict with the Russians. Documents also appear to have been altered online to make the Russians look rather better than they might otherwise be. And I can tell you, military plans at all levels have been altered because of this data dump, Juliet.
And what about the reaction from allied states that the US is accused of eavesdropping on? So Israel, South Korea, Turkey.
Well, of course, it's all too late. You know, the horse has bolted the stable door. That's the problem. Yeah. There's nothing that can be done about this now, assuming the legitimacy of these documents. And certainly Sabrina Singh, who speaks for the Pentagon, thinks that most of them are legitimate. Let's look at the countries individually. The ROK, South Korea, they want consultations with Washington, D.C. after it was revealed that they were unhappy about supplying weapons to Ukraine. Of course, they're doing that to show their voters that they're doing something about this. France denies the presence of French troops on the ground in Ukraine. Turkey is being linked to supplies to the group Wagner, who does lots of the fighting on behalf of Russia. And I think most seriously of all is the allegation in these leaks that apparently Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, tried to overthrow the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, or at least destabilize it, during last month's protests against the Supreme Court reforms in Israel. I think that is a very serious allegation, if it is true. The mutual spying allegations don't amount to very much. All countries do this all the time. But the scope has really rattled those in the Pentagon. They've launched an interagency effort to find out what has been going on. The Pentagon has also restricted the supply and the flow of paperwork through the government organization here. It's extraordinary how many people in the American government get to see what are called classified documents. They've restricted them, apparently. And, of course, the allies have launched their own assessments to see what damage may or may not have been done. Juliet?
Well, John, I think we're going to be talking about this all week, if not beyond. John Terrett in New York, thank you. Well, Russia has refused to comment on accusations that it was responsible for that data leak. The Kremlin described the information revealed from the Pentagon as interesting, but it added that there's a general tendency in the US to blame Russia over intelligence failings. Stuart Smith has the latest from Moscow.
Well, it's been very tight-lipped about what it sees as what it is regarding as leaks, but isn't saying whether it has anything to do with it. It's not saying whether the information is accurate, and the Kremlin, at least, in fact, nor the intelligence services either, are willing to comment on it. Now, whether that's because Russia is looking into whether this information is true or whether indeed it came from the US, we don't know. But one member of the State Duma Committee on Security suggested that there may be a classic scheme to confuse with this information, suggesting that it could be a ploy by the United states to present information, intelligence information, in order to get Russia to make a false move. This particular member of the State Duma committee suggested that instead the military should take into account the information from satellites and not just what he just said, information that journalists write. Indeed, the focus, certainly in the Russian media, is on the apparent Ukrainian weaknesses provided by this report, such as that at the beginning of last month, Ukrainian air defense was particularly weak and that it was running out of ammunition to protect against Russian planes.